A living alien survivor of the now infamous Roswell crash, a treaty between human beings and extraterrestrials. A trip spanning between the stars where members of the United States military were sent to visit and live on an alien world. In the same year as the Gemini 4 spacewalk and the US's entrance into the Vietnam War, did we also send a group of soldiers on a 40 light-year trip to another planet? My name is Aaron Deese, and with me again are Ron Murphy, Heather Mosier, Katie Page, Micah Hanks, and Mark Matsky. This is Project Serpo on UFOs Revisited. Welcome back, everybody.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So I will go ahead and admit at the top of the hour, I really like this case. I really want it to be true. There's a part of me that would really love to see this gain some credibility. So whether or not that is possible is the purpose of our discussion today. Not necessarily to say that it's true, but to determine if that is even reasonable. So let's get right into it. The story goes that in the 1960s, Project Serpo, which is also known as Project Crystal Night, was established, and the 12 members of the United States military were sent about 40 miles to the planet Serpo. Does that line up with what you guys have heard about this case or what you're familiar with?
40 light years?
That's what I have in my notes.
I think you said 40 miles.
Did I say 40 miles?
That's okay.
I meant 40 light years.
Yeah.
The aliens are only 40 miles away. I've seen them. We sent a ship. So the origins of this story, obviously, that's something that's very important. We talk about that a lot on this show. What do we know about the origins of this story?
The Serpo case is an interesting one, especially given the fact that this is something that erupted onto the early interwebs of the 1990s. Basically, a gentleman by the name of Victor Martinez, who ran at the time a pretty popular UFO mailing list, because keeping in mind blogs and things like that weren't quite really proliferating on the web yet. So a lot of the communication about UFOs and there being great interest at that time, it occurred through mailing lists, email mailing lists. So Victor Martinez ran one of these, and he begins getting a series of correspondences from someone who calls themselves Request Anonymous. And Request Anonymous tells this story, which will flesh out some of the details, but Serpo essentially goes all the way back to Roswell. During that crash in 1947, there had been one survivor. It actually remains alive on Earth. There's some communication. And this had been essentially the catalyst for a exchange program that happens many decades later, where a group of people, according to the story, are sent to this planet called Serpo, and they spend several years there. Serpo has 2 sons, and so when the humans come back, some actually elect to stay on the planet, some come back, a couple died before they could make it. And those who did survive, some of them suffered from the effects of radiation after being exposed to it from 2 sons and things along these lines. Now, of course, it sounds an awful lot like science fiction, but this became quite a mainstay in early ufology of the 1990s, given that in addition to Request Anonymous telling this extraordinary story, there were several alleged DIA or Defense Intelligence Agency officials who were also coming in and saying, yeah, we have knowledge of this case too, and we can verify what Request Anonymous is talking about. And so it kind of spun off from there and has still remained a talking point in the modern UFO narrative. So we've got to try and dig into this and find out really what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my question is, how do you go for 40 light years, right? That's the big question. Yeah. Was that ever discussed or fleshed out? I mean, the transportation part of it, how much information was given about how they were able to cover that kind of distance in space?
We don't, as far as I'm aware, not a ton of detail is given on how the craft operated, right, or what exactly they did. One of the descriptions that is given is that they're extremely Spartan on the inside, right. And that this alien race, the Ebens, they're called, the alien being that lived on Earth for a while was apparently referred to as EB1. They apparently didn't use bathrooms, and right. that's actually something that Bob Lazar talked about, which we discussed in a different conversation, that the inside of the craft were very Spartan. So that's an interesting little parallel there, but as far as how the craft operate, I'm not sure if that's ever gone into in any great detail.
I think they talk about that the craft and the pilot of these craft have like a mind-to-mind communication.
It's very intuitive, right?
Yeah, it's very intuitive
Right.
how they flew the craft.
For an alien race, right? But for a human being to get in there and start using the technology, you think that would be vastly different in just the mechanics of how it interfaces with the human mind.
Yeah, brief notes and asides too, kind of piggybacking on what both of you are talking about there. We also have the insinuations by Philip J. Corso sometime later. He had said that the basic assessment of the biologics that were recovered from Roswell, according to the story he tells, that they might have been engineered organisms. I mean, that the pilot was actually more like what you might call an autopilot. It was a biological kind of construction that didn't have, reproductive organs or any of these kinds of things. That might explain the bit about the bathrooms being lacking, but that it was essentially integrated in the control system of the aircraft. It was effectively the guidance system, if you believe what Corso said.
Interesting.
And the word wormhole gets dropped in there, if I'm not mistaken, as far as how they got from point A to point B faster than the speed of light, evidently, in order to make the math work.
In order to make the math work,
Yeah.
right. So there was a bending of time and space then.
So we have a whole lot of speculative stuff thrown in here right from the outset.
Which makes it sound more like science fiction than it does
Yes.
a genuine story. But you want this to be real, right? As you're invested in this story, you want it to be factual.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's why I admitted that from the beginning.
Yeah.
For me, this story has a lot of optimism, and it's a little more lighthearted than some of the other cases we'll discuss, and I like it. But
When they arrived, wasn't it extremely hot, 120, 130 degrees? And then I think, was it on the northern side? It was cooler, so humans kind of made their way over there where it was a comfortable 75 degrees. And so that's very interesting to me
On-
too.
on Planet Serpo.
On Planet Serpo,
yeah,
yes.
when they actually get there, the narrative shifts very abruptly. But from the time of the crash on Earth, where contact is made with EB1, they are able to learn some of the Eben language from him, apparently, which is described as being tonal. I'm not sure exactly what that means. We're talking about musical notes, so maybe they whistle at each other. But somehow they're able to arrange a meeting with another group of Ebens. By the time they arrive, EB1 has died, and then this whole Crystal Night operation is set up. And then they eventually arrive on the planet, and like Katie said, it's described as being Earth-like, but it's much hotter in some areas, cooler in other areas. And as Micah mentioned a little while ago, it's also alleged to have two suns. And one of the interesting things about this, I don't know if we'll be able to show this in the episode, is that there are alleged to be a couple thousand photos that were taken, 3,000 photos that were taken on Serpo by the team. The only one that has survived and made it into circulation is this alleged picture of two suns, which I don't know if you guys have seen it. But again, we're kind of going back to some science fiction tropes. Many science fiction properties reference more than one sun. I'm not an astrologist or a biologist, but do we know anything about what the effect of an environment that has two suns would be on a human being? Does anybody have anything on that?
I mean, there are binary star systems like that, but the whole thing is you have to have that Goldilocks zone in order for life to take place, right? It can't be too hot and it can't be too cold. And I'm sure that there could be a relation to two suns and a planet still being within that zone, but I've never heard anything, speculative of that being found or discovered in place yet. So,
Based on our understanding of gravity and the effect it has on humans on this planet, and of course our experiences on the moon, those of us who have been there, I don't know about you guys, but, we do have a pretty good idea of what might happen to humans during long periods on another planet. For instance, if the planet were smaller and there were less gravity, atrophy of the muscles. We've even seen this among some of the astronauts on board the International Space Station during long extent periods in space. Atrophy of the muscles and other effects that impact their health can occur over time. So a lot of it we can calculate. We don't have firsthand knowledge of what that might be like. As far as those sci-fi tropes, another thing that they mentioned about the alleged planet Serpo is that I don't think this was the first home of the Ebens. According to the narrative, I believe they came from another location. There'd been some sort of a conflict and they were driven away from their original planet. This also is something that you find as a kind of common trope in science fiction, I think. And so they end up on Serpo. It might not have been their ideal place. For all we know, that might have been why they were interested in humanity on Earth. Hey guys, you got a little room down there? You looking for roommates?
We don't take up much space. The other interesting thing too is they do see life on the planet as well too, besides, but it's remarkably recognizable. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something like a mountain lion, I do believe, and there was something I believe like an ox, and something that was very snake-like. But immediately, again, it would be something that we could identify. So it wasn't like it evolved in a form that we could not see as a counterpart here on Earth.
Well, and Serpo was kind of like a hub, it seemed like, because it described visitors from like 9 other systems that were there as well. So even not being an original home planet, it became a hub of some sort for them.
I hear they're putting a Buc-ee's in there.
Let's hope they get a Bojangles as well. You know, another interesting thing about the astrobiological side of all this is that, I mean, a lot of scientists go back and forth on evolutionarily what would happen on another planet. Is it necessarily the case that alien beings, if they were intelligent, would be humanoid? Some would say, well, yeah, it could actually be that in that so-called Goldilocks zone on a planet with essentially the same size and the mass and the abundance of water and other resources that planet Earth has, yeah, probably this humanoid form, 2 hands, 2 legs, you know, a central nervous system and a brain, of course, that's essentially situated like humans are. That would probably be how other intelligent life would evolve. Then some are like, no, we don't know if there wouldn't be intelligent octopoids or intelligent gaseous organisms or plasma life forms that are nothing like humans, maybe nothing that we would even recognize as being life or intelligent. You look at classic science fiction stories like Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, where we have sentient oceans on alien worlds. And the way that it communicates with us is by projecting our dead loved ones into reality, creating manifestations, and so we're effectively haunted by our past loved ones that we've lost. I mean, really eerie stuff. So the idea that you go to an alien world and there's recognizable life like Ron's talking about, and like the Serpo narrative discusses, I mean, it's not impossible, but there's a lot of division over whether it's likely.
Right, and they even said to have little huts and family units, like we do here. So some similarities there as well, the way they lived.
Yeah. Even anthropologically.
Yeah,
You know?
right.
A real compelling part of the story then is that 2 of the astronauts, or whatever you want to call them, stayed. There's evidently something about it that attracted them to make them want to remain there. And to go back to the dual sun thing for a second, in the world of the story, it was explained that one of the effects of the dual suns is that it never really got dark on the planet. It would get towards twilight, but then it would cycle back. So there was really never true nightfall.
So that alone, if we're talking about an environment for human beings to live in, we're very reliant on our sleep-awake cycles. So that alone would take, I would think, a major amount of adjustment. One thing that's interesting that kind of just came to me, when we're talking about the alien life forms that they encountered, Ron mentioned the snake, and one of the descriptions I read was that it was an extremely large snake with human-like eyes, and that this creature was actually regarded by the Ebens as being dangerous or evil, that it's the only time they used weapons to kill one of these things. That's an interesting trope if we're looking at, as we have been throughout these discussions, parallels with ancient literature, specifically the snake in the Garden of Eden. Something that's a little uncanny that kind of resembles us is that serpentine form. I'm curious what you guys think about that.
And they also have the concept of good and evil as well too, right? So that's the other thing that throws you up. And also you have a serpent, and these are called Ebens, right? So very close to Eden as well too. So you do see this kind of cross transliteration almost of our ideologies projected onto them, or them projecting onto us, or what have you. But yeah, again, seems a little bit too coincidental.
Oh yeah, and the anthropomorphic quality of the eyes, with that snake which is identified as being evil, very much like that kind of narrative from Genesis.
Do we think that EBE and Eben, is there some overlap there? Or is it just coincidental that they were called Ebens? But you know, you have the extraterrestrial biological entity acronym. Which came first?
I think it was derivative. My guess would be that it's derivative of that, yeah.
It seems to me, though, with the astronaut that died on the way, I mean, they took the body and there was some confliction. They wanted their weapons, they wanted the body back so they can give a proper burial, but they took that body and they were doing some sort of genetic manipulation, or they took them to this place where they had these tubs of these creatures, and it really upset the other astronaut because they were so strange looking that, like, get me out of this building. So they were doing some hybrid kind of things with different types of creatures and that, if I'm remembering that correctly. Yeah, so of the 12 that went, and I believe there was rumored that there might have been a couple females too, and I'm not clear on that, but one died on the way there, and I know there was some conflict and they wanted weapons to give that person a proper burial, but the Ebens wanted to take them to this vat or this tub and do genetic things, and they took one of the astronauts there and showed them what they're up to, and some of the creatures were hideous and grotesque and really scared him, and so he's like, I want to get out of this building. 2 others died on the planet, and then 2 decided to stay. So of the 12, 7 returned to Earth. All of them died rather quickly on the return to Earth because of the binary system and the radiation effects it had on them. So, yeah.
Another interesting anecdote that I read in the book, which we actually have on the table here, is that when one of the members of the group died on the planet, another member of the team, cried. They were upset by that, of course, and the Ebens did not understand what crying was, and they attempted to administer some kind of medical treatment to that team member. Like, they didn't understand. So it's interesting when there are parallels with human society, family systems and things like that, but then this other thing that is deeply tied to our identity as human beings is completely foreign to them. It's just interesting. The overlapping
ocular
points of
organs
reference.
are broken. We must administer.
You're leaking.
Yes. And I believe it was also stated that the Ebens could speak English. Is that right? So
Fluently.
Yeah, right, fluently. So I'm sure they understand what sorrow is and sadness is if they speak English.
Yeah. It's very interesting because as Micah said, the idea that life would evolve to even be similar to us when we're dealing with seemingly endless variables is a little bit hard to stomach. But then here we have something that's almost identifiable, in terms of a hominoid, but not quite. It's very uncanny.
I think Kasten said in an interview, I don't know if this is in the book or if this just came later, and because he was asked, he gave the answer. But he said there were 2 women in the original pool of potential astronauts to be sent, but he felt in the end it was only males that were sent. That was very interesting, and that was in a Art Bell Coast to Coast interview that he had with Len Kasten, the author of the book on Serpo.
Secret Journey to Planet Serpo,
Yeah.
a true story of interplanetary travel.
Yeah, and he brought that up, that I think he pushed that along to say that if you had a man and a woman sent to Serpo and they stayed, there would be a sense that we'll stay here to propagate the race. And Kasten was very against that idea. He said something to the effect of, we weren't sent there to colonize. It was an exchange. It was a learning experience, and that's it. And I don't know what made him draw that line so tangibly, but he really felt that was not why we went there at all. So and if it was only male, then that would not even be part of the discussion.
Right.
That's something that we haven't really talked about yet, is the exchange part of it. So supposedly they left some of their creatures here. What did they do? Do we get into that at all, as what their purpose was?
Yeah, let's speculate on that. Do we have anything documented or anecdotally about what might have been done there?
Well, it was not a fair exchange, for one thing. It wasn't 10 Ebens for 10 humans. I think it was our 10 for their 1.
I thought it was 12 of us and 1 of them.
Yeah, but it was like
Yeah, it was not even
imbalanced,
and
for sure.
I think the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg is kind of based on this trade, because they're, and the tones too, the way they speak, do, 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 maybe that's the way they communicate, and so maybe that was inspired by that.
there's a rumor, and this is a rumor, I'm not saying this is true, but it's a part of the discussion about this case, so of course we have to talk about it, but there's a rumor that Spielberg knew about this case, that he was in the know for some reason, and that he based the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind on this as a way to get the story out there in the world. That's, again, rumor. A lot about this case is a rumor, but I'm glad you brought that up because...
And, on that point, though, I mean, we also should look at the fact that in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there are actual references to popular literature and UFO incidents. There's one that occurred in Ohio, in fact, back in 1966, Portage County, where there were a couple of law enforcement officers in the early morning hours that chased sort of a football-shaped object that was emitting silvery white light. This object was chased for, an extended period. Multiple different law enforcement officers from different precincts got involved. The object was eventually chased across into Pennsylvania. And in the early morning light, as the sun begins to rise, finally it is observed shooting off upward into the sky. It was quite a detailed experience, really one of my favorite of all time. But in the film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, we do see a police chase involving UFOs, and so there was some inspiration there. And there are other instances, too, in the film. I think Claude Lacombe, the French scientist, is, of course, based on Jacques Vallée, one of the great names in ufology, and actually a computer scientist and physicist and astronomer who has studied UAP now for many decades. So it is clear that there was some inspiration drawn from real-life UFO cases that was depicted in the film. An interesting speculation is, could that work in reverse as well? Rather than there being a possible knowledge of Serpo on behalf of Spielberg or Zemeckis, and that ends up in the film, could the film have inspired Serpo if we want to go in that direction?
Well, I believe the Close Encounters came out in '77, and Serpo was in the '60s, so I think
it was
it would
alleged
have,
to be in the 60s, right?
Alleged to be in the '60s.
Yeah.
Right. But you're right, they do have the cattle mutilations there, and even the effects of the craft, the burns on their faces.
The sunburns,
The sunburns, so that's interesting as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kasten pretty directly says things like, Anonymous gave the Serpo story to Spielberg.
Interesting.
I mean, just straight up says that's what happened. Doesn't really offer any evidence of that happening. Like, here's the little story book that he gave him or something like that. But Kasten is that convinced that he just will say straight up.
And do we know the origins of these emails or how the story leaked?
We do, and that's an interesting point we should make also, especially given that Request Anonymous insinuates things along those lines, because although the purported events occur in the 60s, and this actually having its origins back in the 1940s with Roswell, the story starts coming out when Victor Martinez receives these emails from Request Anonymous. Now, initially, there had been skepticism. A lot of people were looking at this and saying, well, how do we know who this insider is? It did help somewhat, though, that there were alleged former Defense Intelligence Agency officials who were also coming on board and saying, well, we have knowledge of this, too. We can speak to that point. We think that the Serpo exchange really did happen. And it seemed to bolster this idea in a lot of people's minds. And just to further contextualize this, this was all occurring really around the same time that we were having people like, in the previous decade and spilling over into the 90s, still a lot of discussion about Paul Benowitz, about the Majestic 12 papers. Of course, there was interest in Roswell. There was also interest in that primarily, by the way, because in 1980, the publication of the Roswell incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore. Then we also, of course, had Area 51 in the public imagination due to Bob Lazar, him coming out and discussing his experiences at S4. So there's an interesting tie-in with some of that, and that particularly the Benowitz affair and the involvement of Air Force Office of Special Investigation Special Agent Rick Doty, who seems to kind of remain this sort of nexus point of all these kinds of things at times. There had been a researcher, Stephen Broadbent, and a couple of his colleagues who had wanted to try and find out if they could learn who, or at least get some additional information about, what the purposes of these emails have been and who Request Anonymous might be associated with. And so Broadbent and his colleagues decided that they would attempt to write to Victor Martinez claiming to have been Request Anonymous. And they essentially said, can you send us all of the previous correspondences? We've lost everything, or we want to try and preserve it. And so Martinez, of course, said, absolutely, this is historic stuff. Let's make sure that we get this information and preserve it. So they send the emails back, unbeknownst to Martinez, back to Broadbent and his colleagues, pretending to be Request Anonymous. Broadbent says that they were able to trace the IP address, and not only with regard to Request Anonymous, but also several of the other people who were participating in these message exchanges in his email list. And sure enough, he says they all trace back to a single IP address based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which happens to be where one Special Agent Richard Doty would have been at the time. So he felt it was very clear that this whole thing probably had hoax written all over it. But now, if that's the case, and that remains unproven, but I think that one might say that based on that information, it's a strong consideration that should be made. Absolutely. Then what do we make of the Serpo story, right? Is this another potential effort involving disinformation? And if so, why inject that kind of narrative into the UFO community and stir things up? Is it just for fun? I doubt that. There has to be probably some other kind of a reason for doing that. And if so, what might it be, distracting people's attention away from, right?
I'll use a term that many are probably familiar with, maybe some of the younger viewers, but fan fiction, of course, fictitious works adapted from existing material. And in a way, Serpo almost reads like an amalgamated piece of fan fiction. You have aspects of Roswell, you have aspects of the Bob Lazar testimony, you have, we know fictitious stories that seem to be inspired by, or perhaps have inspired, all kind of mashed into the same pot, So in that way, and I'm just guessing here, you asking that question got me thinking, this could be an effort on the part of some entity to discredit other cases that have been subjected to a lot of scrutiny, because now they all of a sudden overlap with this seemingly overwhelmingly bizarre narrative. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, we do have a lot of those, check marks, that we see in filling the boxes here. I mean, there is the insinuation of actual cases that are well known by ufologists, Roswell and things along those lines, interspersed with what, as Ron pointed out, sounds an awful lot like fiction. Then again, the very likely connection of Richard Doty strongly raises the question, having been someone who admitted in the past to having given bad information to a UFO researcher, and many have said that that's a really bad thing in Paul Benowitz's case because he didn't fare very well thereafter. So Doty's involvement, many have said, is very strange. Now, Doty has adamantly denied having any involvement with Serpo for years, and I just want to be clear about that. Yeah. But I think that we should also point out there are some like John Lund and also Mark Pilkington and others who made an excellent documentary film called Mirage Men, a favorite of mine. And they say that, in fact, while they were interacting with Doty at the very same conference back in 2006, the International UFO Congress, where Len Kasten, the author of the book, met Bill Ryan, who ran the website serpo.org, they said that, Doty was telling them stories about videos of alleged alien interviews and things that sounded very much like Serpo. To give a quick example, this alleged interview he discussed with an alien was involving an alien from a planet with 2 suns. It was very barren, very little water on that planet. Again, it sounds an awful lot like Planet Serpo. And so, although he has denied having involvement, it's on record that Doty has told stories that seem to be in the furtherance of what we might call the Serpo mythos.
And it's worth pointing out, whether it's Doty or not, it's one source for the entire Serpo narrative is one anonymous source. So I just put that in there as something as far as being able to verify. There is no real verification process with this story. Either Anonymous is telling us a true story or a story as he understands it, or it's something fictionalized, something made up, or sprinkled in with some good sounding information.
So, but because this is a product of the digital era, at least this version of this story, forensically, like Micah said, we can trace it to a single source, which is something we don't often have in these cases. We can't often do that.
And the Serpo website is down, correct? I don't think it's
active. You can access it through the Internet Archive.
Okay.
Yeah, but the site is no longer online. And in fact, Mr. Kasten had said that was one of the reasons that he wanted, after meeting Bill Ryan, to document the story. He said, there's an impermanence of the World Wide Web. Sites come and then they go. And that one did. But again, the Internet Archive has done a great job preserving a lot of the web, and you can still access some of that site, which, again, at the time when Bill Ryan was running it, he was kind of like the star at the conference. When he came and spoke about Serpo, that was kind of the big headlining act that year. And it was meeting him. Len Kasten told me in an interview back in 2013 when I spoke to him, he said 2 hours or so on the shuttle with Bill Ryan talking with him, and I was hooked. It was just an incredible story that had to be told, and hence why he wanted to write it.
It seems a little counterintuitive to me to believe that this disinformation program spent this time for us to believe there's extraterrestrials and craft, and then have this sensational story that kind of makes it sound a little bit like, or a lot like, science fiction, and it kind of just seems like it would be a strange thing to do in against what the disinformation program would be trying to do. And then another question I have too, did they stand to profit from this story, and did they make a lot of money? What is the motives about bringing it to the public? Why did it come out in the first place? Just to...
Yeah, because doesn't it just end? I mean, communication ends. They have this fantastical story, and then all of a sudden people on Serpo, the Evans, quit communicating with us altogether. Like, there's no continuation. It just, we're done.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I would just say that early on, I don't know of any way that there was direct profit that anyone involved early on, Martinez or, of course, the anonymous sources, that they would have had. I also think, though, when it comes to, and a lot of skeptics over the years have tried to insinuate that there's always some kind of a motive. Not that you said that, by the way, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, Philip J. Klass was the best example. I mean, he couldn't outright debunk a UFO case and say it was planet Jupiter, it was Venus, it was, a U-2 overflight or something. I mean, he would always try to tie it back to, well, then there must have been a hoax and there must have been a monetary incentive. And, I didn't like when he would do that. So to answer that question, I don't know of any financial incentive that the main players early on would have had with this.
It doesn't always have to be financial, though. I mean, sometimes just the idea that I have information that you don't is enough to get you out there as well. So.
Sometimes attention seeking, humans have a lot of interesting motivations that drive them to want to do things.
Yeah, and Kasten did talk about, after the publication of the book, that there were Hollywood conversations that he had, but I don't think it became anything. Like a lot of those conversations, right? I mean, somebody reaches out and you just can't make a deal or get something put together.
And that kind of thing happens all the time. Look, I'm an author. I think there are a lot of authors sitting here at this table. I think authors, if they want to write a book and they want to sell their book and films be made, more power to them, right? You put in the work, go for it.
And I think it's important to state that Mr. Kasten did a great job with this book of putting this information together in a place where we can reference it. It's been, that's part of the reason we're able to have this conversation, because yes, websites do go down and digital this and that. So.
There's one fascinating thing about him I want to make sure that we mention, and that is he had his own experience serving in the Air Force, as it turns out. He was awakened while he was in the service at 3 a.m., went to the window, saw a UFO streaking past, and then spent the next 3 days in the hospital on the base.
Didn't know that.
And what emerged over time was his own conviction that he had been taken aboard a craft, and that was based on stories he had received from other abductees as fallout of their experience that they became physically ill. So that's something that Kasten has in his past, I think, that made him obviously on a track to go meet people like Bill Ryan, be on that shuttle with him for that conversation that would kind of put him into the story to a certain degree.
And I've encountered that myself, not an actual UFO, still waiting, still hoping, but I've met a lot of people who their gateway drug, you might say, is they have a personal experience and then they become researchers. I mean, Travis Walton's very much like that. He goes to these conferences, he tells his story, but when I've spoken to Travis in the past, he always says, I keep doing this because I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to find out what happens. I'm trying to understand what's going on, and I think a lot of people who become the researchers, it's because of an experience that they had that pushes them in that direction.
That's true. It's interesting too, and I think Heather, you mentioned it, you know, the 2 astronauts that remained, you know, did they stay because they maybe fell in love or decided to have a family? And if so, it's an interesting thought to think that we could have these even human hybrids now populating their planet in Serpo.
Yeah. Well,
And what does that look like?
supposedly what were required for them to leave is they had to have no ties here. So it had to be people with no family, no children. So that would leave the door open for them.
And you'd think they'd want to come back or interact with us. Like, why did it just stop like that,
Yeah.
to your point?
Yeah.
There's a cool little feature of the story, which is that Anonymous evidently claimed to be the editor of what's called the Red Book. And the Red Book is a book maintained by the government of every alien race that we have encountered. And it's updated every 5 years. And the editor of the book, and as you use the word editor, you think, you know, is he checking for punctuation, and not that type of editor, but compiling these cases. And then it's that person's task to present the edits or the additions to the book to the sitting United States president. They would be briefed in that manner. So this is a detail that I just found fascinating, and you can't help hear Red Book and then think there's a Red Book and a Blue Book too. Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's another case where we mentioned some of them earlier, but even more additional anecdotes and additional cases and rumors that are crossing over with it. You know, it almost, when you first read it, it seems like a really random construction, but as we've been picking it apart, it's got all of these potential components to it.
And why every 5 years? It begs a question, like, do things, planets, and races change that frequently in our universe that we're having to update the book every 5 years? There goes another race out the door.
You got a coffee with the ambassador of such and such on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, we're going to talk about the new squid people.
Been waiting 5 years for this one. It better be good.
Been waiting for this since my first term. Bye, howdy. Oh my goodness. One thing that's interesting I want to go back to, we talked early on about the Eben craft and how they may have operated, and you know, the telepathic potential or the potential telepathic link to the control system. But one thing that is stated in the book is that military personnel were trained to fly Eben craft. So there was at least a version of the Eben craft that human beings were capable of piloting with standard controls. Whether that's a different version that they set us up with or what. But it specifically says in the book they were trained to pilot this thing in the event that the Ebens became hostile and they needed to escape. So that raises additional questions as well. Did they teach us to fly the craft? Did we figure it out on our own? I don't know. But again, it's one of the interesting components of this case that's
And that ties back too to, I mean, we've heard testimony from even young abductees and children who claim to interact with the craft and learn to fly it at an early age. I've heard this through many circles, right? S4, they're trained to interface with the craft themselves, so that kind of ties back to that.
It does. Yeah, which is another fictional thing that crosses over. There's a film, I believe it's called Flight of the Navigator, which is that exact plot. Obsessed with that movie when I was a kid. So, anything else, guys? I feel like we've done good on this one. While the evidence surrounding Project Crystal Night is questionable, it is an interesting and an incredibly fun story. It has a tone of optimism which is often lost when we talk about potential contact with alien beings. Perhaps they don't mean to harm us, and perhaps we can even work with them. Regardless of whether or not it's true, Serpo may be more a story about our place in a populated galaxy than it is about anything else, which, if any of the cases we will discuss have any truth to them, is exactly where we live.